Hello and welcome to this webinar. This is Shane McGlynn of IRM UK, and today I'm joined by Jared Bartley. Jared is the chair of our MDM and Data Governance Conference, which this year will take place in London from the 2nd to the 5th of November. Jared will be delivering multiple sessions at this event, including a longer version of today's webinar on effective data governance program planning. We welcome your questions via the questions pane, and now over to you, Jared.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I am delighted that you could attend this presentation today. I'm going to give you an overview of how to plan an effective data governance program. Now, doing that in 45 minutes was always going to be a challenge, so doing this in 25 minutes is frankly impossible. So what I've done is just chosen the key elements to focus on today. But I hope at the end of this, you'll have a broad idea of what is involved in planning a data governance program. So let's kick off. Each of the boxes on this first slide shows you a different element of governance program, starting at the top left and then working through in turn to ultimate delivery at the end. The top set of the boxes is, for me, what should be included in your governance program. The bottom set of boxes is what I generally don't include in governance programs, but I've shown them here as you may see them mentioned elsewhere in other data-related literature, such as the Dharma wheel. Now, the only exception to that is potentially data architecture, which is in the box at the bottom corner. Now, I have that down as a maybe. Why is it a maybe? Well, because it all really depends on how you view data architecture. You may consider it as part of your data set, which in case, by all means, bring it on in, or you may view it as more of a technical thing, in which case you could exclude it. It is up to you. And as with many things in data governance, it all depends. There's no one size fits all here. So on the slide, if it is a blue box, I will go into more detail later in the presentation. If it is a gray box, I will have to wait until November, I'm afraid. So going through the top set of boxes in turn. Your mission and vision is what you are all about and where you want to get to. Now, whilst I'm not a fan of huge lofty statements, you do need a mission and vision for two reasons. Firstly, it's a very good way of measuring your progress. How do you know that you are done if you haven't defined your end point? You can't. So best to set out what you want to achieve right up front. Secondly, and probably more importantly, it's a very good selling tool. A snappy mission statement, also known as your end point, really does help management buy-in when you're trying to get across your message. The next box is your current state analysis. Now, sometimes you will see this called a data maturity assessment or something similar to that. Data maturity assessments often finish up with some kind of score or a rating. Low or 1 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 is what you'll end up with. The problem is that you kind of know that already because you wouldn't be doing a data governance exercise otherwise. So a rating in itself is not much help in fixing governance, but it can be another very useful selling tool, especially if it is from a third party. Imagine the case where the consultants have said, in our data maturity assessment survey carried out with 500 people, we got a rating of poor. That's a very good selling tool. Hence, please give me the money, I need to fix it. A tool which will help you more in your design is a current state analysis, which is a term that I've borrowed from lean methodology, which is a much more detailed assessment of the state of your data governance and of data management in the business, as they are interlinked. The more detailed they are, the better. The bigger and more detailed list of issues you can slap down on the table, the better, as this gives you a more accurate picture of what is going on, as well as making you look more credible. The next box is your scope, what is in and what is out. The next box is strategy selection. There are various flavors of data governance, so here's where you take your pick. The next box is your stakeholder list. Now, we all know stakeholder management is important, so here is where you consider that. Depending on your desired endpoint, your chosen strategy, and your current state analysis, in the component section, you decide which bits of governance you will include and to which degree. Obviously, the more you include, the more effective it will be, but the more it will cost. The resource estimate section is where you estimate the resources needed for the project, no surprises there. And to do this, you assess how long it will take to move from your current state assessment to your end state, which is what you defined in your mission statement, via the strategy you selected. Once you have all of that, you can get approval. And by that, of course, I mean get the money. Now, fake governance with names of people allocated to stuff centrally who don't actually do anything is very, very cheap. Real working governance is not cheap. So once you have your approval and your money, you can then start the detailed planning. Of course, at some point, you actually have to deliver what you said you would deliver, and that is the next and longest phase. Don't underestimate this bit. For a big program, for a big organization, you can easily be talking years. Finally, the last element is to embed your new governance processes into the business as usual processes of your organization, especially into the data management processes. If you don't, then although you'll fix the data problems you have now, they'll just come back, and they'll come back very, very quickly. Now, a word of caution before we start. The order of the steps is not completely rigid. Some steps may run in parallel for a bit or swap about. It depends what you learn as you go along. So be prepared to be flexible. This is your project scope. So in planning the scope of your project, you are considering what data is to be included and what is not to be included. Again, it's a balance between cost and value. The cost of governing a piece of data and the value that that governance will bring. Now, at this point, it's very easy to say everything as a scope, but if you do, you'll probably fail. There will be far too much data for anyone to manage. So trying to break it down, you could look at specific data domains, vendors, customers, materials, etc. Or you could look at the data contained in different systems, or you could consider data related to various processes. As far as systems go, you could say everything in SAP, which is absolutely fine. Many governance frameworks work just fine with that. However, in reality, you probably need to be a little bit more nuanced than that. If your biggest area of issue is materials management, then just limiting yourself to SAP may not encompass all areas of materials handling. So let's look at materials management as a mini case study. Finished goods are designed by someone, let's say R&D, likely in their own system, maybe a form of product lifecycle management or a recipe system or such like. That information goes into SAP. But frequently there is other data involved, not in SAP. For instance, pack designs and digital images. They may be stored in a digital asset management system, a DAM system. And then finally, there may be some sort of web shop, or if the product is sold through major retailers, then there is the GS1 system to contend with. Who ensures that the data is right with that lot? Hence, if materials are a problem, in inverted commas, for your business, then you may be wise to look outside of your primary system into other systems and areas to achieve real results. However, don't just discount systems as a concept. For instance, how is your data governed in the BI tool? If you govern the data in the source system, then presumably everything should be fine in BI. Or are there new data categories in that tool, such as summaries, which also need governance? Hence, that's why it may be of value to look at the overall processes, not just systems and not just domains. So the message here in planning your scope is, where is the value to you? Next, we come to choose what the overall strategy for your governance will be. Now, there are kind of three broad approaches here. The first is aligned governance versus federated governance. So what's that? Well, aligned governance at its most extreme is where you have one set of owners, one data model, one set of definitions, etc., that works for the whole business. A single source of truth, in effect. Federated governance is where you have a loose alliance of governance models for all the different bits of your business, be they geographic regions or different operating companies, which are discrete but have common threads. In effect, each region, each opco, etc., has their own governance model, but there is sufficient commonality to allow them to work together. Again, that working together in inverted commas depends on the business. It may be a very thin layer of commonality, sufficient, say, only to allow results consolidation, or it may be a bit more to allow levels of intercompany trading. Strategic versus tactical relates to how much stuff you want governed under that program. Strategic is, well, a lot of it, and tactical is just picking off the bits of value and governing them in isolation. Finally, domain versus element is the broad approach you will take to setting this up. Essentially, you are going to hand over, are you going to hand over big slugs of data to groups of people or people and then get them to own it themselves? Or are you going to be very prescriptive in terms of, say, this data element going to this person and that data element going to that person? So if you go back to our materials example, we could say that we would hope to go for a strategic model, i.e. a single way of working for all opcos globally, starting with the downstream bit, say image handling, web shop, and GS1, as we may think that the SAP and PLM bits are okay. And then we allocate each data element to an owner. Now, the further up this slide you go, the more effective will be your governance, but also the higher the cost. One point not to lose sight of is the impact of the culture of your organization on this. If you have a very devolved business model with numerous trading entities with little central control, then you may be unwise to go for an aligned approach. A federated approach may be more appropriate for you. If you have a very top-down organization used to following corporate rules, the strategic model, which is generally more successful and an efficient model, may be possible. Stakeholder management is important in any project, and governance projects are no different. Different types of sponsorship or involvement will depend on the aim of that sponsorship, what you want to get out of it, and the person involved. Very senior management support, such as the CEO, the CFO, and the CIO, is clear. At the end of the day, you will certainly need a level of buy-in there to secure any funding. However, getting stakeholders outside of your usual club of people is highly beneficial, I think. In my current role, the two most useful allies actually came from retail sales and digital marketing. Why is that? Because those two groups see the issue of poor data as part of their daily work. With respect, the CEO and the CFO do not. As I once said to a CFO when I worked in finance proper, he had no clue how much effort went into producing that one piece of A4 paper in front of him. There is no one pushing the button on SAP somewhere and then carrying it to your desk. There is hours of manipulation in between. And the marketing people and the retail people know this well, and so can make very, very good allies. A word of warning, however, the higher up the food chain you go, the less knowledge about data people have. So you need to go back to basics with your pitch each and every time you talk to them. One of the biggest impacts on cost and delivery are the number of components in your program and their complexity. So these are the main elements of a program, and spinning through them very, very quickly in turn. Policies and procedures are always included somewhere, but it's really easy to spend a lot of time on them for not a lot of benefit. So rather than develop copious rules on what to do with stuff that no one will ever read, perhaps try to lean towards writing more statements of intent. For example, we will have one view of the customer, and so we will have one singly owned customer data source. Or data security is our overriding concern, so we will manage marketing campaigns in-house. The data quality framework and the KPIs are how you measure data quality in your business. What is really important to you? Whilst bordering on data management, the whole point of data governance is data quality, so it is essential to consider it. Again, there's a spectrum of data quality here ranging from, say, we want 95% of our vendors to be deduplicated, to 100% of our vendor bank accounts have been validated to third-party evidence, to maybe each material has been validated by an owner. When you try to recruit owners and data advisors, you need to have a clear view of what you expect from them. There are two big reasons why this is important. Firstly, so they are clear on what you want from them. And secondly, so you are clear when they are not doing what they agreed to. So for that clarity, it's good to have a role profile for them that you can share with them and get their buy-in. You also need to develop a bunch of communication materials to go to the business with in order to do your recruitment. Now, these should be general enough to limit the work invested, but sufficiently tailored to be able to differentiate between, say, owners and advisors, between different data objects and between different domains. You need to design engaging communication materials if you are to recruit. This is an area where it is easy to skimp on quality. However, this would be a serious mistake. You only get one shot at convincing these people, so you need to come across as professional, serious people with a clear message. I recall my boss once insisting that we pop around to see a supply chain director on governance, despite us not being ready. She was adamant. We did go and see him. And of course, he was easily able to unpick our position, and we never got him back. Next in the component list is the functional model, which is the tool you use to identify which function the fields should belong to. Very, very quickly, it involves you talking to data coordinators on the ground, and these are the people who collect data for entry into systems or who understand the systems if data is automatically collected. Once you understand where their data is coming from, or more accurately, which function the data supplies belong to, then you can define who should own the data. The owners should be the ultimate data suppliers. At that point, you have the functions that should own the data, but eventually you need to find the people who will do the owning. More specifically, you need to find the role that will do the owning. So once you have defined the people in principle, you need a recruitment campaign to onboard them so that they can and they actually do own the data. It is pointless having owners in name only that don't do anything. So a great deal of effort needs to be put into this recruitment section. You need to go and see them, and so make sure that you plan a lot of contact time and travel into your resource planning. Shoe leather and petrol are the tools of the trade for this section. Next are your definitions. Now it's really easy to burn vast amounts of time and resource on writing definitions, but you need to be clear on exactly what you are striving for. Do you want to go to the nth degree of detail, loads of technicalities, documenting all the relationships between items in the system, field lengths, and all of that stuff? Or do you just want to go for the four things that matter? What is it? What is it called? Where is it? And what do we want people to do with it? Again, it depends. But if your business is highly acquisitive, or you're undergoing an ERP rationalization program, which will involve frequent entity onboardings into that single ERP, then the former may be useful. But if you are not, then you really need to be sure who is going to read what you have written. I'm saying don't waste effort here, I think is the message. Documentation is a means to an end, which is data quality, and should not be the end in itself. Finally, we come to the data dictionary / glossary. or more specifically, data documentation format or tooling. So what form of documentation or tooling will you need to manage your governance going forward? And that depends on many things, the money that you have, the appetite of the business to read the stuff, and the culture of the business, especially in terms of collaboration. So if you have an active collaborative business, then perhaps a digital tool would work for you. If you have a more siloed business, then perhaps you just keep your documentation as a flat file, only as a reference for you. So once you have a steer for your proposed components, then you can develop a resource estimate. Your resource estimate is quite straightforward, I think. Who can do all the previous activities and how long is it going to take? As everyone has a day job, it might be necessary to bring in externals to do the work. However, be very clear on who is going to do the actual physical work. So whilst externals may be very adept at frameworks and on toolkits and all that kind of stuff, who is actually going to recruit the owners? Who is going to write the documentation? Quite often, externals can't or won't do that. So the message here is to be very realistic, but obviously it all depends on the choices that you made previously. Now, unless you're going for a very light touch governance exercise, the costs could well be very high. And at this point, it's really tempting to go for the we'll start small approach, which is fine, as long as you are clear with everybody that there is a part two. If you don't, that part two may not get done after part one, and you could be stuck with a very small governed area. So it may be better to spell out the whole program now for transparency's sake. In terms of getting approval, you need money, and maybe lots of money. To get that, you need to get your proposal signed off by the people who have the money. To do that, you're going to need several things. You need your mission statement to show the end point of all of this. You need a value statement, which is a statement of the benefits of doing this. You need your resource estimate, and then you need to pull it all together into a business case. Now, your value statement is a summary of the benefits of doing governance over data. Benefits fall into two categories, hard and soft. A hard benefit is a cash saving, usually associated with not having to do something. So for example, not having to do rework of poor data, or not having to redeliver because of a wrong address, or getting a volume discount, or something like that. A soft benefit is a missed opportunity somewhere. For instance, being able to analyze your data set accurately to make good decisions. Being able to target potential customers is a soft benefit. Obviously, these are much more difficult to quantify. As an aside, of course, there is a huge feedback loop in here. You don't just want to pile it all in and then go to the board for a wheelbarrow full of cash. Of course not. You need to weigh up the chances of success and then cut your cloth accordingly. Finally, you need to deliver what you have said that you will deliver. Firstly, you need to deliver the components that you've chosen, the owners, the definitions, the dictionaries, etc. That's pretty clear. However, as you go, it is essential that you give lots of feedback to stakeholders about your progress. You can do that any way you like, but owners recruited, data points governed, data points documented, and records cleansed are good starting points. You need to have a clear idea at the outset what this reporting will look like. Do remember your audience, and do remember to always keep selling the general governance message every time you meet someone. You also need to plan how and when to communicate. Do you need a steer code to get regular airtime with senior people, or are you going to pick people off individually one at a time? Don't forget to do general feedback to the whole business, so that needs to be planned in as well. I always find this quite tricky, to be honest. The first communication out is dead easy. The second, the third, and the fourth are much harder, as you try to make the message relevant but different to the first one. You need to also be really careful to design business as usual processes to first keep your governance framework alive, and second, to ensure that you get the benefit of your new governance. For example, supposing somebody in your business wants a new brand. Before, they may just have had it added to the brands list in your ERP, job done. Now the data owner needs to approve it. So what is the mechanic for doing that? And this all needs to be agreed in advance with the process owners. Finally, and obviously, you need to cleanse your data that is now governed, but also plan to keep cleansing it on a regular basis. Okay, so that was a very, very quick and fast overview of how to plan an effective data governance program. The key messages are: plan in detail, be realistic, and get as much support as you can. If you'd like to talk to me further, please do reach out to me via LinkedIn. So that's all from me now. I hope you found it informative. I'd be delighted to see you all, hopefully in person in November, for the full presentation. Thank you for your time. We now move on to questions.
Thank you so much, Jared. And we have a few questions. First one, please.
Great.
Which are the hardest bits of the program to plan for and deliver?
The hardest bits of the program are the business case, certainly. That's always a challenge. That's a challenge for any project. The recruitment of the owners is also something which is very, very difficult to plan for. In some programs, it goes really well. In other programs, it doesn't go particularly well, and you've got to put in a lot of effort. It's an area that I wouldn't underestimate. You need to spend a lot of time traveling throughout the business, talking to people, gathering owners together, gathering advisors. You may go and see one that you think is the right person, they're not, and then you have to move on to another person. So I think the recruitment phase is really easy to underestimate, and it's the hardest thing to implement.
Thank you. And any tips for doing a business case?
Yeah, so the business cases are always really difficult, and business cases in data governance are extremely difficult. The problem is that it's very difficult to quantify what the benefits are going to be. If we could say definitely that this governance program would generate £1 million worth of benefit, then it would be dead easy. But it's very, very difficult to do that. So what I do is I do my costs first, obviously, then you're kind of pretty clear on what they will be. Then you look at your hard benefits. So these are the things that we would stop doing. These are the FTEs that we can take out because we're not having to do things. Again, it can be an estimate, but you should be reasonably close on that. And then in terms of the soft benefits, get as big a list of soft benefits as you can, but bolster them with examples of where things have gone wrong in your business already. So if you have had a problem with a customer delivery, put that in. If you have got problems with analyzing your data set, we were unable to do this at that point, so we were unable to make good decisions, then put that in. And then the difference between your upside and your costs is what you have to bridge with your soft benefits. And then a good tip I found was to try and translate that into an increase in sales or an increase in gross profit. And usually that's a very, very small number compared to the total sales of the business or the total gross profit. And then your message is, well, look, all we would have to do to pay for this governance program would be this. And then the people listening to you making the decisions may not agree with you, but equally they won't disagree with you. So I found that's a good way of selling that in. Turn it into something concrete that people can get their heads around. So we need a 0.01 increase in our sales next year to pay for this governance program, and that's something that they can get, and they will go, yeah, okay, I can kind of understand that, and we go with it.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Should the funding for a DG program come out of IT or business functions?
Oh, that's a good question. And again, as with everything in data governance, it varies. For instance, we've just undertaken an exercise to recut our product hierarchy in JDE because it was set up quite many years ago, and it's a little bit untidy now. And there's a cost there to put that change to SAP and understand the impact of how that's going to impact on other systems, such as the planning system, etc. And the cost was jointly funded by IT and, so it's a three-way split between the planning function, the finance function, and the IT function. So if you can get some cash from your stakeholders, in particular people like retail and e-commerce, then obviously that's great. But it does depend how your overall funding is structured in your business. Sometimes IT has the bucket of money and make the decisions about what gets done. In other businesses, it's the business has the IT cash and it's up to them to generate the business case. But I would split it, if you can, between IT and the business getting the benefit.
Great, thank you. And what are the pros and cons of an aligned governance strategy versus a federated one?
Yeah, that's another very common question. Just to recap, the aligned governance structure is whereby you've got corporate control. There's one way of working, one set of owners, one set of documents that works for the whole business. The aligned model is where each operating company has their own data governance model, and they do their own thing, but there is sufficient commonality between those governance models for the business to function. So for instance, you may have an agreement on a material length, material description, etc. So it allows you to do intercompany trading. Now, obviously, if you've got one definition, one way of working, one set of owners, that's clearly the best because you've got absolute clarity. Where that doesn't work is where you've got a very, very devolved business whereby the central person really doesn't have the insight or the resources to govern this stuff locally. On the flip side, if you've got an aligned business governance model, then everybody's doing their own thing. So there's lots of duplication of effort. The tipping point for this is, again, cost. So if you add up all the costs of doing governance locally across the business, is that more or less than the extra cost and effort you will have from doing it in a centralized way? Because doing it in a centralized way can be quite expensive. And it's also fraught with problems in terms of some stuff just doesn't work locally. So if your business can do a centralized model, then generally it is best, but in some cases it's just impossible. So you have to go for a federated model.
Great, thank you, Jared. What kind of KPIs can you use in data quality?
And data quality is the end point of all of this, and it's very easy to lose sight of that with these programs. The program itself is not the point. It's getting the data quality is the point. And this can also help you in your scoping and planning, is to figure out the data quality domains. So is our data complete? Is it accurate? Is it timely, etc.? And to report data quality based on those domains. So rather than try and come up with an overall overarching KPI which says our data has got 98% quality, you can't do that. That will never happen. What you can do is to say that 99% of our materials are deduplicated. 98% of our materials have been signed off by somebody else. So it's good to have KPIs and numbers behind things, but don't be tempted into coming up with, grandiose traffic lights and whatever. Really nail it down by domain. So for instance, materials, vendors, customers, and then nail it down by data quality metric. So is it complete? Is it deduplicated, etc.? And then come up with a dashboard, for want of a better word, which will present that to the business. Some metrics are more important than others. So for instance, deduplication is kind of a housekeeping thing. There is a small risk that, for instance, if you've got the wrong vendor, that you'll pay the wrong vendor, but it is a very, very small risk. Whereas data accuracy, you make the wrong thing or your customer addresses are wrong, that is a much more important metric to focus on. So you can give a weighting to the scores that you apply to your data.
Great, thank you. And one last question, please, Jared. You mentioned e-commerce being able to fund programs. Are there other parts of the business you can identify where benefit could be large to request support or buy-in from?
Yep. The further downstream you go towards the customer, the more impact there is, the more drama there is, and also tends to be the more money there is. So if you go upstream to say R&D, and it's a very important area, R&D, they tend to be quite a small organization with not a huge amount of money. But if you go further down the train to say retail, operational retail, etc., the salespeople, when something goes wrong there is much more of an impact, and it's much more tangible for senior management to get a hold of. So we've delivered something wrong, we've got a barcode wrong, or something like that. So the closer you are to the customer, the more dramatic the effect, and the more easy it is to sell in the data governance message. I'm not saying that upstream is unimportant, because there could be serious problems upstream, but if you go downstream, it's more visible and sexy, and then you can work your way gradually upstream.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who attended this webinar, but a special big thanks to you, Jared. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Cheers.